Someone called the cops on me for sleeping in my own cabin, not for throwing a party, not for playing loud music, not for doing anything that could even remotely be described as disturbing the peace, just for being there, for existing on my own property, in my own building, on land that had my name on the deed. It was a Friday night in late October. I had driven 3.5 hours after a brutal week at work, hauling a bag of groceries, a cooler full of drinks, and nothing but the intention of spending a quiet weekend completely alone in the woods. No phone calls, no meetings, no noise, just me, a fireplace, and the kind of silence that city life never gives you. I had owned this cabin for 7 years, 7 years of weekend retreats, summer getaways, and the occasional solo trip exactly like this one. I knew every creak in the floorboards. I knew which window let in the best morning light. I knew the name of the deer that wandered through my back clearing almost every evening around dusk. This place was mine, in every possible sense of the word. I had been asleep for maybe 2 hours when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks on the front door, then a voice. "Sheriff's Department. We need you to come to the door." I sat up in the dark, completely disoriented. My heart was going fast before my brain had even fully caught up. I pulled on a sweatshirt, turned on the lamp, and opened the door to find 2 sheriff's deputies standing on my porch, flashlights angled at my face. "Sir, we received a report of a suspicious individual on this property," one of them said. "Can you tell us what you're doing here?" I looked at them for a moment. Then I said the most obvious sentence in the English language. "I'm sleeping. This is my cabin." Before I explain what happened next, you need to understand the situation with Linda. The cabin community I belong to is governed by a small HOA, about 40 properties spread across 200 acres of wooded land in the mountains. Most of the owners are completely reasonable people. We wave at each other. We share firewood during bad winters. We leave each other alone, which is generally the entire point of owning a mountain cabin. And then there is Linda. Linda had moved into the community about 3 years prior, purchasing a cabin 2 lots down from mine. From almost the first week she arrived, it became clear that Linda had a very specific vision for what this community should look and feel like, and an equally specific belief that it was her personal responsibility to enforce that vision on everyone around her. She had filed HOA complaints against 4 different neighbors within her first 6 months. She had organized a petition to ban short-term rentals, which failed by a wide margin. She had argued at 2 consecutive annual meetings that the community needed a formal gate and a guest registration system, essentially a sign-in sheet that required all visitors to be approved before entering the private road. That proposal also failed, but Linda didn't stop showing up. She was always watching, always noting which cabins had lights on when she didn't recognize the vehicle in the driveway, always ready to assume the worst about anything she couldn't immediately explain. What Linda did not know, what she had apparently never bothered to find out, was anything meaningful about me. She knew I existed. She had seen me at a couple's of HOA meetings. She had filed a complaint against me once, 2 years ago, over a fire pit that she claimed was too close to the property boundary. The complaint was reviewed, found to be without merit, and dismissed, but she didn't know who. I was outside of this community. She didn't know what I did for a living, and she had absolutely no idea what was about to happen when those 2 deputies sorted out the situation at my front door. The deputies were polite, genuinely professional. I want to be clear about that because this story isn't about them. They were just doing their job based on a call they received. I invited them in out of the cold. I showed them my ID, then I walked them to the small desk in the corner of the main room where I keep a folder. Yes, I keep a folder at the cabin too, because I learned a long time ago that documentation is everything. Containing the property, deed, my HOA membership documents, and the title paperwork. I pulled out the deed and handed it to the first deputy. He looked it over, looked at my ID again, looked back at the deed. "This is your property," he said. It wasn't really a question. At that point, "It is," I said. The second deputy had already radioed something in. He came back and said, "We're sorry for the disturbance, sir. The call we received described an unfamiliar vehicle and lights on inside a cabin that the caller believed was unoccupied. I asked, as calmly as I could, whether they could tell me who had made the call. They couldn't share that officially. But one of them, in the way that people sometimes communicate things without technically saying them, glanced in the general direction of the road that ran past my property. I didn't need them to say her name. I thanked them for their professionalism. They apologized again for waking me up. They left. I closed the door, stood in my living room for a full minute, and then made a decision. I wasn't going to let this go. Not out of anger, not out of a desire for revenge, but because what had just happened, a woman calling law enforcement on a property owner for the crime of being in their own home, was not something that should pass without a response. And the response needed to be proportionate, documented, and absolutely undeniable. So I sat down at that desk at midnight, and I started writing notes. Everything I could remember, every word the deputies had said, the exact time they knocked, the exact time they left. I wrote all of it down while it was still fresh. Monday morning, I called the HOA management company and filed a formal complaint against an unnamed party for filing a false report with law enforcement regarding my presence on my own property. I was deliberate about keeping the language neutral and factual. I wasn't accusing anyone by name. I was creating a record. I also called my attorney, the same one who had helped me with a property boundary issue years earlier, and asked for a brief consultation. She confirmed what I already suspected. Depending on how the incident was characterized, filing a false police report, even a seemingly minor one, carries real legal weight. It wasn't something to take lightly. Word travels fast in a small cabin. Community. By Wednesday, I had received a message from a neighbor who had heard through the grapevine that Linda was very agitated about the situation with the deputies. Apparently, she had expected the whole thing to be handled quietly. She had expected, I imagine, that whoever was in my cabin would be escorted off the property, the incident would close itself, and she'd never have to explain her phone call to anyone. She had not expected me to file a complaint. She had also not expected what happened at Thursday's emergency HOA board meeting, a meeting that Linda herself had called, ironically, to address what she described as security concerns in the community. I showed up, and here is the part of the story I have been building toward. I am an attorney, a property rights attorney specifically. I have spent the last 19 years representing homeowners, landowners, and property owners in disputes involving exactly the kind of overreach that Linda had just committed. I have testified before state legislative committees on HOA reform. I have won cases that set precedent in 3 different counties. I have a wall in my office covered in framed rulings, and more than a few of them involve HOA boards that thought they had more authority than they actually did. Linda walked into that meeting expecting to talk about security cameras and gate proposals. She found me sitting at the table with a notepad, a copy of the HOA bylaws, and 19 years of very specific professional patience, the color that left her face when the board chairman introduced me by my full name and professional title and watched her slowly realize who she had called the police on, is something I will carry with me for a very long time. I did not destroy Linda at that meeting. I want to be honest about that because some of you might be hoping for a dramatic courtroom ending, and I'm not going to pretend it went that way. What I did was present the facts to the board, clearly and without emotion. I described the incident. I provided the timeline. I noted that a community member had called law enforcement on a property owner who was legally present on their own land, based on nothing more than an unfamiliar vehicle and a light on inside a building. I pointed out that this kind of behavior, if left unaddressed, creates real liability for the HOA as an organization, because if the board is aware that members are filing false police reports against other members and they take no action, that inaction becomes part of the record. The board passed a formal resolution that evening. It didn't name Linda specifically, but it stated clearly that HOA members are not authorized to contact law enforcement on behalf of the association. that all security concerns must be routed through the HOA management company, and that members who file false or misleading reports to law enforcement or to the HOA itself may face suspension of membership privileges. Linda did not speak for the last 40 minutes of that meeting. She resigned from the HOA's informal neighborhood watch committee 2 weeks later. I haven't had any issues since. But here is what I actually want you to hear, because this story is about more than one difficult neighbor and one uncomfortable night.